All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General's report on sexual violence and conflict is out as a document. It highlights patterns of violations as well as challenges faced and actions taken by states to protect women, girls, men, and boys from such violence. While many countries are affected by the threat, occurrence, or legacy of conflict-related sexual violence, the present report is focused on 19 countries for which credible information is available. The report notes that sexual violence is no longer treated as merely a byproduct of insecurity, but rather as a significant form of insecurity in itself. It is in the Secretary General, in the report, the Secretary General calls for victims of sexual violence to be recognized as legitimate victims of conflict and terrorism at the national level, which can entitle them to relief, reparations, and can also destigmatize survivors of these crimes. As I mentioned, the report is online, and my understanding is that it's being presented to the Council, I think, on the 15th. And also another report I wanted to flag, which focuses on Nigeria. Boys and girls in northeast Nigeria continue to be brutalized as a result of Boko Haram's insurgency in the region and ensuing conflict. And that's the conclusion of the Secretary General's first report on children armed conflict in Nigeria, which documents the impact on children of the severe deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation in the country between June of 2013 and December of 2016. Virginia Gamba, the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, says that Boko Haram has inflicted unspeakable horrors upon the children of Nigeria's northeast and neighboring countries. During the reporting period, attacks by Boko Haram on communities and confrontations between the groups and security forces resulted in at least 3,900 children killed and 7,300 more maimed. Suicide attacks became the second leading cause of child casualties, accounting for over 1,000 deaths and 2,100 injuries during the reporting period. More details available on the report online, where the report can be found. And I want to flag travels by the Secretary General. This Saturday on May 6th, the Secretary General will travel to Colombia, South Carolina, to speak at the commencement ceremony at the University of South Carolina. He'll address some 1,300 students as well as receive an honorary degree from the institution. Before the Secretary General will depart back to New York from Charleston, where before flying back to the city, he will have an opportunity to visit the Boeing assembly plant at the airport. This is part of the Secretary General's efforts to step up engagement with the private sector. And he will return to New York Saturday evening. And the Secretary General has agreed with the President of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, to establish a direct partnership between the UN and the International Olympic Committee. Accordingly, it was decided to close the UN Office on Sports for Peace, Development and Peace, effective April 30th of this year. The substantive portfolio of the office will henceforth be handled by the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. The Secretary General has also requested the UN office in Geneva to oversee the closure arrangements for the Office for Sports Development and Peace. He wishes to express his appreciation to the dedicated service provided by the staff and its leaders. Thank you. And just wanted to flag some items from Stefan de Mistura, who, as you know, is in Astana. He just spoke to reporters a little earlier and told them that he thought we've been able to witness an important, promising, positive step in the right direction in the process of de-escalation of the conflict. He said the most important thing is that the initiatives in Astana today is a step in the right direction because it is pushing for concrete de-escalation in addition to the ceasefire in 4 areas. He added that de-escalation obviously must be followed by humanitarian access, which is part of the memorandum, and we have the transcript of his remarks available in my office and online. And yesterday, as you will have seen, the camp of the UN mission in Mali in Timbuktu was attacked. Preliminary reports indicate that 6 shells landed in the camp, 1 peacekeeper from Liberia was killed, and 9 were wounded. 8 of them were evacuated to Bamako. Peacekeepers have reinforced the camp's protection and deployed aerial reconnaissance assets to identify the zones from which the shells were fired. The UN mission condemns the attack in the strongest terms and calls for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. We, of course, join our colleagues in the UN mission in extending our sincere condolences to the family of the peacekeeper who was killed, as well as to the Liberian people and government, and we wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. And the UN mission in Colombia condemns the kidnapping yesterday in Guaviare of a national staff member of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and demands the immediate release of the staff member. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad al-Hussein, today urged the government of South Sudan to halt any further military offensives towards ABUROC in the west bank of the Nile. Civilians in ABUROC are in areas controlled by the opposition armed forces, facing a military offensive by the government. There are concerns that the Sudan's People's Liberation Army in opposition has positioned itself in close proximity to civilian areas, placing civilians in harm's way in the event of an attack by the SPLA and its affiliated forces. Mr. Zeid warned that civilians in ABUROC are at serious and imminent risk of gross human rights violations, interethnic violence, and redisplacement. He calls on all parties to comply with their international humanitarian law, including all feasible precautions to prevent civilian casualties. And still in South Sudan, the UN mission's temporary operating base in Leer town came under small arms fire last night from the direction of nearby government-held town. Ghanaian peacekeepers quickly returned fire, deterring an attack. There were no casualties within the base or among the internally displaced people who had sought protection in areas adjacent to the base. The head of the UN mission, David Shear, strongly condemned the attack and called on all parties to respect the sanctity of UN premises. And our colleagues at UNICEF warned today that nearly 75,000 refugees and migrants, including an estimated 24,600 children currently stranded in Greece, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the Western Balkans at large, are at risk of psychosocial distress caused by living in a protracted state of limbo. The situation is particularly acute for single mothers and children stuck in Greece or in the Balkans, waiting for reunification with family members in other EU countries. In many cases, adult males are the first family members to make the trip to Europe, with the rest of the family following later. But with 2016 border closures and the implementation of the EU-Turkey statement, other family members are being held up in transit countries from where they must apply for family reunification, a process that typically takes from 10 months to 2 years. And the World Health Organization announced today that it will launch this year a pilot project for pre-qualifying biosimilar medicines, a step towards making some of the most expensive treatments for cancer more widely available in low and middle income countries. And if you were like me, you did not know what biosimilar medicines are. They are produced from biological sources such as cells rather than synthesized chemicals. Like generic medicines, biosimilars can be much less expensive versions of innovative biotherapeutics. They are usually manufactured by other companies once the patent on the original product has expired. More information online. And today, as we do every month, we issue through FAO the food price index for the last month. Global food commodity prices fell in April amid expectations of ongoing robust supplies in many key staples. Sugar, vegetable oil, cereal, dairy prices all fell, while meat rose by 1.7%, as pig meat prices increased in response to a strong domestic demand in the European Union and increased sales to China. More on the FAO's website, and then I will take my questions. Today we will have at 1:15 a press conference on the outcome of the 16th session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Speakers will include Brian Keane, rapporteur of the 16th session of the forum, who's from the U.S., Les Malazer, member of the Permanent Forum from Australia, Mai Thin-Yu Mon, an Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact and Shin human rights organizer from Myanmar. And tomorrow we will have Philippe Lazzarini, the Deputy Special Coordinator for Lebanon and Resident Humanitarian Coordinator, to brief you on the latest developments there. And today is Star Wars Day. All right, all right. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Carol.
Stefan, can you say anything about what role the UN might play in these de-escalation zones in Syria?
I'm waiting to get a little bit more detail. Obviously, we've always maintained that any de-escalation to the violence is vital to save lives and increasing conducive conditions for fruitful intra-Syrian talks. We will do whatever we can to support de-escalation, but as I said, I expect a bit more details later on.
Would the UN play any kind of monitoring role?
Again, I'm waiting to get a bit more detail. I mean, we've obviously always been very supportive of the discussions in ASTANA, especially some of the discussions concerning detainees and humanitarian demining. Madame.
There is a Dutch journalist, his name is Dirk Walters. He works as a correspondent in Israel-Palestine, and he will be deported most probably for his coverage in Hebron about settlements. This is at least what he's saying, and because he's covering a very critical stories there, and the Israeli officials are saying that they are doing this because of some permission issues, but there was an editorial in Haaretz supporting his view. Any comments on that? And could you please put this on the broader context regarding Palestinian journalists that they are detained in Israeli prisons? Thank you.
I haven't seen the particular report you mentioned. I can look into the case. Obviously, I think as the Secretary General expressed through his message yesterday, he supports an active and free press wherever and whenever journalists are able to work. Masood.
Thank you, Stefan. This question that I've been asking about this situation in occupied Kashmir, in which India is now blocking all the villages and so forth from uprising because of the human rights situation that exists over there. And now some of the newspapers have speculated that it might result in unintended consequences, being a nuclear war between the two countries. Is the Secretary General thinks that this situation is of that import that he should eventually try and tackle this situation, as he has often said that he would, but he has never?
I mean, as we said, we're obviously following the situation closely, the recent developments included, and I think we would reiterate our call for the parties to find a peaceful solution through engagement and dialogue. Mr. Lee.
Other questions, but do you have a statement on or does the UN system have a statement on the killing of Somali government minister Abbas Siraji, a 31-year-old government minister killed by the government?
We obviously condemn what appears to be an assassination of this minister and send our condolences to his family and to the government of Somalia.
Because some people are saying he was shot by mistake, and I'm wondering, does the UN have any role in security?
Role in providing his security. No.
No. In training in this case, the bodyguards of the Auditor General.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And also, I wanted to ask. Okay. Yesterday I was at one of the credential photo ops upstairs on 38. One of whom was the ambassador of Gambia. It was described as the new ambassador of Gambia, and the Secretary General said, "Welcome. We're proud to have you among us, democratic country." And it's the same ambassador that represented Yahya Jammeh, Mr. Mamadou Tangara. So I'm just wondering, was this a calculated, and was he trying to say, you're the same ambassador who represented Jammeh, but now you're a Democrat, or was it
Well, my limited understanding of diplomacy is that ambassadors represent states and not individuals.
Right, but it's the same guy. So
my understanding is that ambassadors represent states and the policies of those states, and not people personally.
Can you explain why he had to represent his credentials if he's still the ambassador of the country?
That's something to ask of the Gambians, why maybe he had to represent his credentials. Stefano.
Thank you. Again, about press freedom and the days they've been celebrating also in Jakarta. We heard the UNESCO representative talking about how difficult it is for their agency to really do. I mean, they of course defend press freedom, but they don't have tools to really to to try to force countries to respect press freedom. So my question is, there was until last year, there was a lot of talk on special, where there is a new special envoy by the Secretary General just for the protection of press freedom and the protection of journalists. And there was some talk with Ban Ki-moon. Then I don't know how Secretary General Guterres think about the idea, but what he's doing about this idea, and if this encounter some obstacle has been, if there is something that makes this idea impossible to...
Any new type of envoy would obviously require a resolution by a legislative body, most likely the General Assembly. I think what's important to remember is that there are already a number of mandate holders on this, whether it's organizations like UNESCO, whether it's special rapporteurs for freedom of expression, and others. And so what's important is that member states cooperate with the existing mechanisms which help highlight the challenges a number of your colleagues face around the world. The Secretary General has spoken out for press freedom, and I think the important thing is really on focusing and strengthening, if needed, the existing mandates.
So just to follow up, so does he support the idea of a special envoy, or think it's impossible to go through with this idea?
I feel I've answered the question already. Yeah, in the back, and then.
Thank you. Has Secretary General's Special Advisor for Cyprus, Mr. Aide, met Secretary General today? If not, when is he going to meet? And is he going to talk to the reporters and give some information, please?
We can ask if he will talk to the reporters. We'll pass that request along. I think he's meeting Mr. Aide tomorrow. Welcome back.
Thanks. Can you tell us any more about the hostage in Colombia? Has any contact been made with the rebels? Are there any demands being made for his release or anything like that?
Obviously in these situations, when someone has been kidnapped, the less we say, the better. What I will tell you is that we're obviously in touch with the Colombian authorities to help secure the person's release. Abdelhamid, then we'll go to round two.
Thank you. I have two questions. One in line with the press freedom. A Saudi man, his name is Ahmed Al-Shamri, was sentenced to death in 2015 for insulting religion. His second appeal had been lost a few days ago, and the death sentence has been upheld. Is there any information about the case of Ahmed Al-Shamri?
I'll try to see if I can get an update on the case for you.
My second question, back to the issue of Palestinians on hunger strike. There was no statement, neither from the Human Rights Commission, nor from the Special Envoy, nor from the Secretary General. And I just recall when one Israeli prisoner was in jail, the Secretary General went and visited his family. There was a statement by the Undersecretary General in the Security Council. Every organ of the UN has been involved asking for his release. Heads of state asked for his release, and his name was Gilad Shalit. But here we're having 6,500, including elected officials, 300 children, 17 women, and 1,500 on the 18th day of hunger strike, and no statement. Can you explain that?
We have repeatedly talked about publicly the issue of administrative detention and have called for the Israeli authorities to either charge people or release them, whether this has been in briefings by the Special Coordinator, briefings in the Security Council, and what I've said from here in flagging the fact that the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights was following the particular issue. Carol. And then Evelyn, sorry.
That issue, the Arab League today called for a UN inquiry of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails.
I'll take a look at that statement. Evelyn.
Thank you, Stefan. On Syria, do the proposals for safe areas, Russia's the latest one, he made one, does that look at all real? Do you see anything in Mr. de Misture's comments that sounds like he believes it's going to happen?
As I said earlier, we're looking, I'm trying to get a bit more detail on exactly what was agreed upon. I think Mr. de Mistura, in his statement to the press, said he welcomed any efforts of de-escalation and said the UN would support it. But obviously we're looking at exactly the details of what could be required of us. Mr. Lee.
Let's go about Thailand and then Western Sahara. In Thailand, there's a well-known human rights lawyer, Mr. Prawat Prapanukul, who first he was missing. I was going to ask you yesterday when he was missing. He's emerged, but he's facing 150 years in jail for insulting the king. And so I wondered there's a specific case, but there's a more general principle. What does the UN, the Secretary General, think of people facing jail time of that length for insulting a head of state?
I will check with our human rights colleagues, see if they have anything on that case.
And on Western Sahara, you can imagine what the second question is, the same one that I've been asking. But I wanted to ask, you may have seen, or the mission or DPA may have seen, that the ship, it's a Moroccan ship that was stopped and impounded in South Africa with 50,000 pounds of phosphorus. So it's basically the idea is that exploitation of natural resources is illegal. That's what the court there is finding. Given the UN's role in trying to deal with this situation and the Secretary General's personal calls on both sides, what does he think of the continued export of natural resources and of this decision by the South African courts to stop it?
I would refer you back to Secretary General's report and his call for renewed negotiations between the parties.
What
Michelle,
about the video?
I have no news on you. Okay. Evelyn, go ahead, and then we'll go.
Can you say again, the IOC is going to be handled by which department?
DESA.
DESA. Why?
Because
rather,
it's really,
why not human rights or something? No, right.
Well, because it's natural home. It's about sports, peace, and development.
Okay. Right. Thanks.
On that, could this be considered a cost-cutting measure?
Well, it will. Yes, it will save money.
How much?
We can look at the budget of the office, but it is the closure of an office and the elimination of a special envoy post.
Stefan, I asked you yesterday if Mr. Aida is planning a meeting here at the United Nations between the President of Cyprus and Mr. Akinci. Can you find out for us?
We will find out. We've asked. I have not gotten any information. See you tomorrow on May the 5th.